Sports Show. Before I get on out of here, I had to talk about a story that's very, very important. And albeit indirect.
What if the biggest WNBA story of the year was never Caitlin Clark's highlight reels, but the chaos exploding behind closed doors? Because right now, one question is setting the basketball world on fire. Did Caitlin Clark's arrival in Indiana trigger a full-blown internal collapse that pushed Stephanie White to the breaking point? And then came the moment that sent fans into absolute meltdown. Stephen A. Smith, one of the loudest, most influential voices in sports media, dropped comments that ignited a storm of speculation so explosive that Fever fans immediately started connecting terrifyings. Was Stephanie White really done with Indiana because coaching this team had become impossible? Think about what we've all watched. The sold-out arenas, the non-stop media frenzy, the crushing pressure, the obsession surrounding Caitlin Clark every single second she breathes. Now imagine trying to run a locker room inside that hurricane. Veterans fighting for relevance. Front office expectations skyrocketing. National cameras watching every mistake. Fans demanding instant championships. And if whispers are even partially true, what happened behind the scenes wasn't tension. It was war. Because this may not be a simple coaching story. This may be about power, control, egos, league politics, and a franchise that suddenly stopped feeling like a basketball team and started feeling like a reality show with championship stakes. And what allegedly happened next changes everything. Before Caitlin Clark ever stepped onto an Indiana Fever court, this franchise was living in basketball darkness. Years of disappointment, empty seats, national irrelevance. A team that once carried championship history had become an afterthought while bigger WNBA storylines dominated the spotlight. Then Caitlin Clark happened, and everything exploded. Not gradually, not quietly, overnight. A single draft pick transformed Indiana from forgotten franchise to the center of the sports universe. Ticket demand skyrocketed. National networks suddenly cared. Jerseys disappeared from shelves. Every road game became a spectacle. Every interview became headline material. The Fever didn't just gain a player, they inherited a full-blown cultural earthquake. But pressure like that doesn't create peace. It creates emotional fracture lines. Because inside that building, real human beings still had to function under impossible expectations. Veteran players who had spent years grinding in relative obscurity suddenly watched a rookie become the unquestioned center of the basketball universe. Every camera followed Caitlin. Every promo featured Caitlin. Every debate became Caitlin. And whether publicly acknowledged or not, emotional tension like that changes locker rooms. Then came Stephanie White. Not just another coach. Indiana basketball royalty. A respected voice. A proven basketball mind. Someone expected to bring discipline, structure, and championship-level identity to a franchise entering its most chaotic era. But here's where the emotional collision began. Stephanie White represents old-school basketball philosophy. Earn your minutes. Trust the system. Team over celebrity. Structure over chaos. But the Caitlin Clark era doesn't arrive quietly. It arrives like a media supernova. And suddenly the question became terrifying. Can a traditional basketball culture survive inside a modern superstar machine? Because every Fever decision now carried emotional consequences. If Caitlin struggled, national outrage. If Caitlin sat, conspiracy theories. If teammates got more touches, fans questioned priorities. If coaching decisions looked conservative, social media erupted. This wasn't normal sports pressure. This was psychological warfare. And for Stephanie White, the emotional burden only intensified as the basketball world began demanding impossible contradictions. Win immediately. Develop chemistry. Protect Caitlin. Maximize ratings. Keep veterans happy. Silence critics. Build culture. Avoid controversy. That isn't coaching. That's crisis management. Then came the emotional fracture point fans started obsessing over. The physicality. Hard fouls. Aggressive defensive attention. Media narratives about Caitlin being targeted. Public debates over officiating. National arguments over league treatment. And suddenly Indiana wasn't just managing basketball anymore. It was managing a cultural war. Some wanted protection. Others wanted toughness. Some wanted Caitlin unleashed. Others wanted balance. And Stephanie White sat directly in the center of all of it. Every expression dissected. Every timeout analyzed. Every substitution weaponized online. The emotional environment became radioactive. And if you believe the speculation now consuming fan communities, that internal pressure may have become far more damaging than anyone realized publicly. Because once fans started believing the organization itself was divided over how to handle the Caitlin Clark phenomenon, the story stopped being about basketball. It became about survival. And according to the whispers now spreading across WNBA circles, one internal conflict behind the scenes allegedly changed Stephanie White's relationship with Indiana forever. Because what happened next may explain why this story refuses to die. This is where the story allegedly stopped being about normal coaching pressure and became something far more explosive. Because according to the speculation now consuming fever discourse, the real battle inside Indiana wasn't Caitlin Clark versus opposing defenses. It was Stephanie White versus the impossible expectations created by the Caitlin Clark machine. And that's a completely different war. Think about the emotional contradiction. Stephanie White was hired to coach a basketball team. But the moment Caitlin arrived, Indiana became something much bigger than basketball. A media empire, a ratings engine, a non-stop national obsession. And if the whispers are even remotely accurate, that created the central conflict that changed everything. Did Indiana want a championship team? Or did Indiana want the Caitlin Clark show? Because those are not always the same thing. That question allegedly became the emotional fault line inside the organization. One side, according to fan speculation, believed Clark needed balanced roster development, structure, shared offensive responsibility, and long-term growth. The other side, at least in the eyes of furious fans, wanted instant superstar maximization. More Caitlin, more exposure, more headlines, more spectacle. That tension allegedly turned every basketball decision into political warfare. Who gets touches? Who gets minutes? Who gets featured? What system gets installed? How much pressure gets placed on Caitlin? How much freedom does Stephanie actually have? And then came the first shocking twist. The Stephen A. Smith angle. Because the second his comments entered public conversation, online communities exploded with one terrifying interpretation. What if Stephanie White didn't simply leave? What if she was emotionally pushed to the edge by organizational chaos? That theory spread like wildfire. Because Stephen A's name carries massive emotional authority, fans instantly treated vague commentary like hidden confirmation. And once that happened, the narrative escalated fast. Not coaching change, not organizational adjustment, but internal collapse. Then supporters started revisiting every uncomfortable public moment, every frustrated sideline expression, every awkward press conference answer, every defensive coaching quote, every lineup controversy. Suddenly all of it became retroactive evidence. That's when things got dangerous. Because once fans emotionally lock onto a betrayal narrative, everything gets reinterpreted through suspicion. Then came the first true twist. Some online speculation argued Stephanie White's issue wasn't Caitlin Clark herself. It was the ecosystem around her. The media pressure, the expectations, the organizational panic, the impossible spotlight. That distinction changed everything. Because if true, Caitlin wasn't the villain. She was collateral damage inside a much larger emotional power struggle. And then came another explosive question. Did leadership actually want basketball decisions or marketing-friendly outcomes? That rumor lit up fan communities instantly because it touched the exact fear many supporters already had, that basketball strategy was becoming secondary to brand management. No evidence officially confirms that. But perception doesn't need confirmation to become emotionally real. And once that emotional narrative formed, the story transformed from speculation into full-blown fan mythology. Then whispers allegedly emerged that one behind-the-scenes disagreement became so emotionally intense it permanently fractured trust between leadership voices. If true, that was the real breaking point. Because what allegedly happened after that internal fracture could turn this from emotional speculation into the biggest fever controversy yet. If the first twist was the idea that Stephanie White may have been overwhelmed by the machine surrounding Caitlin Clark, the second twist is even more explosive. Because according to the emotional speculation now spreading through WNBA fan communities, the real fracture may have happened over one brutal question. How should Indiana handle the physical war surrounding Caitlin Clark? That question changed everything. Because this wasn't just about basketball strategy anymore. This was about philosophy, identity, protection, and power. Fans watched Caitlin take hard contact. Cheap shots became national talking points. Debates over officiating exploded daily. Social media turned every foul into courtroom evidence. And pressure inside Indiana allegedly became unbearable. That's where the second major twist enters. Some theories claim Stephanie White wanted Indiana to become tougher. Not reckless, not dirty, but intimidating. A team that sends a clear message. If you come after our superstar, you deal with all of us. That old-school mentality fits Stephanie White's basketball DNA. Physical toughness, emotional resilience,
No victim mentality.
fight through chaos. But according to speculation, another internal vision may have existed. A more corporate one. Protect the brand. Avoid ugly optics. Keep Caitlin marketable. Maintain the polished image. If that clash happened, that's organizational warfare. Because suddenly the debate becomes terrifying. Was Indiana trying to build a basketball team or manage a billion-dollar public image? That question sent fans into emotional overdrive. Then social media made everything worse. Old clips resurfaced. Every hard foul got replayed. Every emotional timeout became proof something was wrong internally. Every coaching decision got ripped apart by fan detectives. The atmosphere became toxic. Then came the truly dangerous escalation. The narrative shifted from Stephanie under pressure to Stephanie trapped. And that changes the emotional psychology completely. Because trapped coaches don't inspire confidence. They signal dysfunction. Then the fan theories became even darker. Some began arguing Caitlin Clark herself may have become emotionally isolated inside impossible expectations. Too valuable to rest freely. Too famous to fail quietly. Too central to the league's growth to be treated like an ordinary rookie. Again, speculation. But emotionally devastating speculation. Because fans fiercely protect stars they identify with. Then came the second shocking twist. The villain wasn't clearly Caitlin, or Stephanie, or the front office. It was the pressure ecosystem itself. The non-stop cameras, the media obsession, the ratings machine, the expectation that Indiana instantly become a championship product. That interpretation hit hard because it felt psychologically believable. And then whispers allegedly suggested one internal conversation about public image versus basketball reality became deeply confrontational. If true, that may have been the moment trust shattered. Because once coaching authority gets undermined by broader organizational pressure, collapse becomes possible fast. Now the emotional stakes became enormous. Not just for Stephanie White, for Caitlin Clark, for Aaliyah Boston, for veterans trying to survive role changes, for a franchise suddenly carrying impossible national expectations. And according to the speculation now fueling this controversy, what happened when fans started sensing this internal dysfunction publicly may have made everything 10 times worse. Because once the internet believes there's internal chaos, it doesn't calm down. It hunts for blood. The second fans sensed even the possibility of internal chaos, the emotional explosion was immediate and vicious. Because this wasn't ordinary criticism anymore. This became a full-blown public trial. Social media didn't just react. It weaponized every rumor, every clip, every facial expression, every substitution, every post-game quote. Suddenly, the Indiana Fever weren't being discussed like a basketball team. They were being dissected like a collapsing reality show. And at the center of that storm stood Caitlin Clark, the player many fans see as the savior of the league, and the emotional lightning rod for every controversy surrounding it. Supporters split into camps instantly. One side argued Caitlyn was being failed by coaching, failed by leadership, failed by a league allegedly unprepared to protect its most valuable star. The other side pushed back hard. They argued the obsession around Caitlyn had become toxic, that every fever storyline now revolved around her, that teammates and coaches were being unfairly crushed under impossible public expectations. And just like that, the fanbase fractured. That's when the emotional fallout became dangerous. Because fractured, fanbases don't just criticize, they radicalize. One post says Stephanie White is protecting basketball integrity. Another says she couldn't handle modern superstar pressure. One thread accuses leadership of incompetence. Another screams media manipulation. One creator says Caitlyn is a victim. Another says the hysteria around her is the real problem. Chaos became the product. Then national media attention intensified everything. Because once Stephen A. Smith's name got dragged into fan interpretations, the emotional stakes exploded. Now supporters weren't just debating basketball. They were debating institutional betrayal. Cover-up narratives started circulating. League politics got dragged in. Broadcast networks got accused. Executives became villains in emotional fan fiction. And once conspiracy-style narratives enter sports fandom, logic usually leaves the building. Then came the emotional collateral damage. Stephanie White's reputation became battlefield territory. To some, she became the principled veteran resisting corporate pressure. To others, she became the coach who couldn't manage the biggest superstar moment in league history. Same person. Two completely opposite emotional mythologies. That's how volatile this became. Then fans began projecting the fallout onto the players. What does Aaliyah Boston think? How do veterans feel? Is locker room chemistry suffering? Does Caitlyn feel isolated? Is trust breaking internally? No clear answers. Only escalating speculation. And speculation creates emotional certainty even when facts remain blurry. That's what made this so combustible. Then came the most dangerous public question. If Indiana is this emotionally unstable now, what happens after a losing streak? That question terrified supporters. Because losing would validate every fear, every conspiracy, every emotional accusation, every leadership criticism. And according to online whispers now circulating through basketball communities, some people allegedly believe the public pressure itself may already be affecting internal morale more than anyone wants to admit. If that's true, the fallout hasn't even started yet. Because the most explosive part of this story may not be what happened behind closed doors. It may be what happens next if the fever can't stop the emotional bleeding. And one final rumor now moving through fan spaces has people asking a terrifying question about Caitlyn Clark's long-term future in Indiana. And this is where the story stops being about Stephanie White and becomes something much bigger. Because the most explosive question now tearing through WNBA fan communities is no longer, did internal drama push Stephanie White to the edge? It's this. What if Indiana's chaos becomes a long-term problem for Caitlyn Clark herself? That question changed everything. Because fans can tolerate controversy. They can tolerate coaching debates. They can even tolerate organizational dysfunction for a while. But they will not tolerate the idea of generational talent being emotionally or professionally wasted. That's the psychological red line. And once that fear entered the conversation, the emotional intensity went nuclear. Supporters started asking terrifying questions. If the environment really became this unstable, how sustainable is this? If coaching authority fractured, what does that mean for player development? If leadership voices clashed, who's actually steering this franchise? If public pressure keeps escalating, how long before locker room chemistry takes real damage? Then came the darkest fan theory yet. Some online speculation began pushing the idea that Caitlyn Clark's arrival didn't just expose existing organizational pressure. It accelerated it. That every unresolved weakness inside Indiana suddenly became magnified under the brightest spotlight women's basketball has ever seen. That theory spread because emotionally, it feels believable. Big stars don't create dysfunction from nothing. They expose what's already fragile. And if that interpretation is even partially true, This was never just about Stephanie White. This was about an organization struggling to survive its own transformation. Then came another twist. Some supporters started openly imagining future scenarios nobody in Indiana once discussed publicly. What happens if frustrations continue? What happens if results disappoint? What happens if constant pressure turns temporary tension into permanent distrust? What happens if Caitlin eventually questions the environment around her? No evidence suggests that now, but emotionally, fans are already going there. Because once trust cracks, imagination takes over. Then the league angle returned. Because Caitlin Clark isn't just another player. She's ratings, revenue, national relevance. And if the franchise carrying that spotlight appears unstable, every controversy becomes bigger than basketball. That's why this story feels explosive. Because it touches nerves far beyond Indiana. Then came the final terrifying whisper. According to speculation now moving through intense fan communities, some believe the next major public controversy inside the Fever organization could permanently define the early Caitlin Clark era, not because of basketball losses, but because of emotional perception. And perception drives modern sports narratives faster than truth. That means one awkward interview, one visible sideline moment, one losing streak, one leaked internal story could ignite a firestorm impossible to contain. So now we arrive at the real cliffhanger. Was this entire controversy just internet-fueled emotional overreaction built around Stephen A. Smith's speculation? Or was it the first visible crack in a much bigger structural problem hiding beneath Indiana's brightest era? Because if the next chapter brings even one real internal fracture into public view, this won't be a rumor anymore. It'll be a full-blown WNBA crisis. And if that happens, everyone will ask the same brutal question. Did we just watch the warning signs in real time? Now it's your turn to say what everyone else is thinking. Was this just another internet-fueled overreaction? Or did we just witness the first warning sign of something much bigger inside Indiana? Because, let's be honest, the Caitlin Clark era was supposed to be a dream. Historic ratings, sold-out arenas, a new golden age for women's basketball. Instead, fans are debating coaching pressure, organizational chaos, locker room tension, media narratives, and emotional fallout that refuses to disappear. So, what do you believe? Did Stephanie White get crushed by impossible expectations? Was Caitlin Clark unfairly pulled into a storm bigger than basketball? Is the Indiana Fever simply going through normal superstar growing pains? Or is there genuine dysfunction hiding behind the cameras? Drop your raw, unfiltered opinion in the comments right now. I want the truth, no safe takes. And if you love explosive WNBA breakdowns, behind-the-scenes drama, viral sports controversy, emotional fan reactions, and the stories everyone else is too scared to unpack,
Hit subscribe.
turn on notifications. Because if even one real internal story breaks from Indiana in the coming days, this conversation is going to explode in a way nobody can ignore. And trust me, if this was only the beginning, the next chapter of the Caitlin Clark era could become the wildest story women's basketball has ever seen.